Shalom, and welcome to Parasha Highlights and Insights. This is Rabbi Fischer. This week is Parashat Vayikra, which is also the beginning of the book of Vayikra. So we'll start off with a few general observations about the book of Vayikra. Since at the end of the book of Shemot, we had the construction of the Mishkan and Hashem's presence and glory filling the Mishkan and covering the Mishkan. So the book of Vayikra largely deals with the Mishkan, how the Mishkan is to function. Along those lines, we learn about the function of the Leviim and the Kohanim, which means that we'll deal with sacrifices. And in a broader sense, we will learn about Kedusha, about sanctity in its various forms. In Parashat Vayikra, we have a number of mitzvot, according to the usual count, 11 positive and 5 negative. And the major focus is on sacrifices. And interestingly, the majority of the sacrifices discussed are voluntary sacrifices, but there are some obligatory ones as well. So, the first section of the parasha, which will deal with a kind of sacrifice called an olah, begins with Hashem calling to Moshe and, as it were, inviting him into the Mishkan, because before Hashem called to him, Moshe was not able or was not permitted to enter the Mishkan, and Hashem begins to teach him. As I said, the first section is about a sacrifice called an olah, which is usually translated as a burnt offering, because it is burnt in its entirety on the altar. And we are told that an olah can come from the animal kingdom. As we'll see that among the animals that are suitable for sacrifice are cattle, that is to say cows, flock, which is sheep and goats, and later on we'll learn about birds. First focus is on olah of cattle. I repeat that the sacrifices that are talked about here are voluntary. In other words, a person makes a commitment, makes a vow to bring a sacrifice. So if he makes that vow, the Torah proceeds to tell us how to fulfill that vow. If the olah is cattle, it must be unblemished and male. The owner of the cow that is brought, the bull that is brought actually, leans on the head of the animal. This is called smicha. And when the animal is slaughtered and the blood is collected, the blood is sprinkled on the horns of the altar, called 2, which is 4, meaning at the opposite corners, the Kohen sprinkles the blood in a way that it hits 2 sides of the altar. The olah is skinned, and that skin belongs to the Kohanim. Then the animal is cut into its pieces and placed on the altar, but first it must be washed. Then we talk about the olah of flock, which is to say sheep or goat, once again an unblemished male, and it has the same basic procedure as cattle. Then the Torah proceeds to the olah of birds. The kind of birds that are used are either a turtle dove or young pigeon. It is slaughtered by a process called milika, which involves using the fingernail to cut the simanim, the trachea and the esophagus, from the back of the head, and then the blood is squeezed on the side of the altar. The crop, which is the part of the digestive system that has all kinds of dirt, is to be removed and discarded, and then the bird is split and offered on the altar. After talking about the burnt offering, we then proceed to a different kind of a sacrifice, which is a sacrifice from the grain world. It's called mincha, and grain offerings have a number of different types. The first type that is talked about is grain offering that is brought of flour. And it must be fine flour, which includes also oil and incense. When the flour is offered, then a handful is taken. It's called kamitza, which is basically the flour that fits within the palm of the hand of the Kohen underneath the three middle fingers. And then that komets, that handful, is offered, and the rest is given to the Kohanim. The second type of grain offering, flour offering, is baked. And in this case, the flour is mixed in such a way that it can be baked. Uh, there are two ways of doing that. One is loaves, and the other is flat, and they all contain oil. Then there is a type called pan-fried offering, where uh, the dough is placed into a pan and fried there. It has oil and is to be broken into pieces when offering it. Then there is a deep fried offering, also involving oil. Some of the general rules of sacrifices are mentioned here as well, namely, no leaven, no chametz is to be offered. Two exceptions. Or at least one exception is mentioned here, which is the two Shavuot loaves, which are not even offered on the altar. Later on, we learned about another type of bread which is leavened, but in general, no leaven. And another general rule is that all offerings must be accompanied by salt. We're also told about the first grain offering, which is the Omer brought on the second night of Pesach. That is an offering from the newly ripened barley, which is what becomes ripe at that time of the year. The next section deals with peace offerings called shlamim in Hebrew. A shlamim is called that, as we will see, because everyone has a part in it. The Kohanim receive, the altar receives, and also the owner receives. So in a sense, it brings peace among various participants. If a shlamim is made of cattle, once again, it must be unblemished, but it may be male or female, depending on the offering that the person makes for the vow. Once again, we have smicha, leaning on the head, sprinkling the blood on the altar, and once again, the offering of fats, etc. If the shlamim comes from a flock, sheep or goats, so it must be once again unblemished. It can be male or female. It has the procedure of smicha and so on. If it can be sheep or goat, but if it's a sheep, then the fat tail, the tail towards the back of the animal, which is large fat, is offered. As long as we're talking about the offering of the altar, the Torah also says that the main things that are offered on the altar, which are fat and blood, those things are not to be eaten. To be precise, the kind of fat we're talking about that one is not permitted to eat is called chelev. There's other kinds of fat, which is called shuman, which is permissible to be eaten according to halacha. But the type of fat that's offered on the altar, that may not be eaten. And that's a general rule about meat. We then proceed to an obligatory type of sacrifice, a chatat, a sin offering, which is offered by one who has committed a sin, certain serious sins, but only if they were committed inadvertently, unintentionally, what's called bishogeg. We start off with the sin offering brought by the Kohen Gadol. If he makes a significant error in judgment, so he must bring an unblemished bull. He does smicha, and there he confesses. The blood is sprinkled toward the parochet and on the horns of the incense altar, and The fats, etc., are offered on the outer altar, and the rest is burned outside of the sanctuary in the place of the ashes, the place where the ashes are deposited. Second kind of sin offering is one that is brought by the community, and that is when the court makes an error that people follow. Once again, it must be an unblemished bull. There is smicha, weaning. Blood is sprinkled toward the parochet and on the horns of the incense altar. The fats are offered on the altar, and the rest, once again, is burned in the place of the ashes, burned outside of the Mishkan. The third kind of special sin offering is the offering brought by the king or any other kind of leader for the people. This must be an unblemished male goat. There is smicha, blood is on the altar, and the fats are offered as well. And then in the final type of chatat sin offering is one brought by the individual, any individual. In that case, it is unblemished, female. If it's a goat, there is smicha and blood on the altar, and the fats offered. It could also be an unblemished female sheep. Once again, smicha, blood on the altar, and the fats are offered. Then the Torah deals with a type of offering brought for sin, but it is adjustable. This is called an asham, which means a guilt offering, and it's for specific sins that are mentioned here. One might be withholding testimony. Second might be violating the sanctuary while tameh, when one is unaware of that. And third, violating an oath that one has forgotten. So in those cases, one confesses a sin, and by adjustable, we mean that the type of offering that one brings is dependent on what we would call one's tax bracket. Someone is wealthy, then they bring an unblemished female sheep or goat. If one is poor, they will bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, and one is as a sin offering, and one is at a burnt offering. And if a person is really poor, then they bring wheat flour. There are also not adjustable, but fixed guilt offerings, another kind of asham, for certain specific sins. One is for the inadvertent misappropriation of sacred items. That's what's called me'ilah. And in that case, one brings an unblemished ram. One has to provide restitution to the amount of what was used, what was misappropriated. Plus, one must add a fifth, but this is what we call a fifth from the outside, meaning a fifth of the total. It's actually 1/4 of the principal. Then there is a case of doubtful guilt, where a person is not clear whether he committed certain serious sins. So then he brings the doubtful guilt offering, which is of an unblemished ram. And then another type of sin for which there is a fixed guilt offering is for different types of dishonesty. Taking a false oath in which one denies a loan, for example, or denies robbery. And once again, one must make restitution, plus adding that, what we call a fifth, but is really a fourth of the principal. And it too is of an unblemished ram. So there are a lot of different types of sacrifices discussed in this parasha. Let's return to the subject of the special sin offering brought by the king. Now, with all of the other people who must bring us a guilt offering, a sin offering, the Torah uses the word im, if. If a person sins, or even the Kohen, or even the court. But when it comes to the leader, who's called here the Nasi, it doesn't use the word im, it uses the word asher. Asher Nasi yecheta, that a chieftain. Nasi is an all-encompassing term which could include a king, but anyone who is the leader of the people. And it talks about the sin offering that's brought. But the question is, why does the Torah use the word asher, that? So 2 approaches are worth mentioning now. One is from Rashi. Rashi says that the word asher, which means that or in case, is also reminiscent of another word, which is ashrei, happy, fortunate. And he says in the name of Chazal that if there is a generation whose prince, whose king, whose political leader uh, is willing to admit that he's wrong, that he has sinned, and therefore brings an atonement sacrifice. So that generation is ashrei. That generation is happy, is fortunate, because it's very, very tempting for that kind of leader to deny that he has done anything wrong. So if he admits it and brings a sacrifice, then that generation is asher, is ashrei, is fortunate. The Seforno takes a different approach. He says that when it comes to everyone else who might do a sin, it's if, maybe yes, maybe no. However, when it comes to a leader, it is almost unavoidable that the leader will commit a sin because the higher one is, the more chances one takes, and therefore it's uh, virtually guaranteed that the leader will need to bring this sin offering because he will sin. Political head is very very important, and it's very very common. That's the way he translates the word asher, that or when he sins. So we've been given an introduction to the world of sacrifices in this, the beginning of the book of Vayikra. I thank you all very much for joining me in this exploration of Parashat Vayikra. This is Rabbi Abraham Fischer for Parasha Highlights and Insights saying Shalom.